Hello and welcome to Psych319, Chapter 11, Part 1. This lecture is going to cover language. And the reason I titled this as Language as Communication is because there is a distinction. When you ask, well, do animals have language? We all think we know what language is, but some species might have a different type of language. They might have something that's more akin to communication as opposed to language. Is language uniquely human? That's a question I would leave up for debate. It depends on how you define language. What is language? We need to define that. I think one of the distinctions can be illustrated by Kanzi the bonobo. Bonobo is our closest relative in the ape family, and bonobo can use about 4,000 words. And the way he identifies those words is by pointing to little pictograms in a book. So he can make little basic sentences that have meaning, and he can communicate. But his vocabulary is limited to about 4,000 words. And obviously he can't vocalize because his voice box is structured different from human voice boxes. So we have to wonder whether his language the same as our language, or is it more like communication? Is a dog's bark language, or is it communication? We can communicate ideas without using language, and so there might be a distinction between the two. This slide shows the evolution of language for hearing and deaf children. You could ignore the deaf children right now. That's this group over here, but this is hearing children, and it's the average length of phrases they utter up until about 26 months of age. And so they go from like roughly 1 to 2 word sentences up to normal size sentences in a very, very short period of time. And this is the progression of language in a chimpanzee that learned similar to what Coco the bonobo learned. And you notice that they have word utterances that sort of plateau, and they don't progress much further than that. So their vocabulary is limited to about 4,000 words, but they don't seem to also grow beyond a certain age. So there seems to be a quantum leap in human communication versus ape communication. Language is generally considered verbal communication, and communication can include all other means of relating ideas. Visual ways of communicating ideas, tactile, like touching somebody's arm, or smell, or anything else. And language doesn't necessarily have to be verbal, so sign language is a good example of a nonverbal language. It has a grammar and a structure that is consistent. And so obviously this is found in humans, but even in babies tend to exhibit sign language before they exhibit verbal language. So it's sort of there is a core grammar in the human brain that is expressed in babies before they are able to utter words. And so that's an interesting little tidbit. So in order to approach the study of language, we have to define it very clearly. So we say that it's composed of discrete and identifiable parts, meaning that there are parts that can be identified, taken apart, combined, put back together to form new sentences with new meanings. So that means words, phrases, sentences, and so on and so forth. We say that language is arbitrary, meaning that there's an arbitrary relationship between the symbols and the meaning. So when a dog barks, the bark is very similar to what it's trying to say. It's saying, hey, I see something, or hey, there's somebody at the door, or hey, something, something. But what a human would do is a human could say something like sneak up, or a human could say in a very soft voice, hey, whatever you do, don't turn behind you, there's a guy with a knife. And while the message implies danger, the way the delivery is being stated is quite different from the meaning. And so that means that there's an arbitrary relationship between the way you say something and what you're trying to say. We say that language is regular, that it's governed by rules, grammar that's automatically acquired, that there's a system that's consistent. And by that token, we don't teach language to kids. They acquire language automatically. And that's important to know. That means that we are born with the innate ability to acquire language. Parents don't teach their kids language. All you need to do is take a kid and put them in a language-rich environment and they will pick it up. We also say that language is productive, meaning that language can express an infinite number of ideas using a limited and small number of words. Even with just 4,000 words, a child can say so much. They can communicate basically their most basic needs and wishes. Language is a very interesting system because in the brain it's actually a combination of multiple systems working together, and if any one of those systems breaks, you get very unusual types of behavior. So this, even though it's scribbled out, is a letter that you can actually read, written by a patient. Dear Dr. Harrington, thank you for your letter of September the 18th or something. I shall be pleased to, so on and so forth. If you can read this guy's terrible handwriting, you can eventually get through the letter. The interesting thing is he can't read it at all. He has a type of brain damage called pure alexia. So he has the ability to speak and hear language, and he has the ability to write, but he has totally lost the ability to read not only his own handwriting, but words in general, because of a specific type of brain damage. So writing and spoken language and written language are actually occupied by two different pathways in the brain, and one can damage one without the other. Yes, that says what I've already said. These are two primary centers of the brain that are involved in language. You have Broca's area, which is primarily involved in language production, and then Wernicke's area, which is involved in comprehension. And there are several surrounding regions and links between all of these. So if you break one link or damage one area, you get a particular type of language deficit. This is a picture with a lot of action going on. There's water spilling out of the sink, a kid is about to fall while he's stealing cookies from the cookie jar, so on and so forth. And you could give this to a patient with brain damage and they will give you various different types of responses. So a person with Broca's aphasia who has difficulty producing language might know exactly what's going on and be able to relate it, or be able to comprehend the meaning of the picture and know what they want to say, but have a very difficult time saying it. They might stutter a lot. They might have difficulty finding particular words. So instead of saying cookie jar, they might say bar. Or instead of fall, they might say ball. They might reach for the wrong words or not be able to produce the words at all, but you know that they want, you know what they want to say. A person with Wernicke's aphasia, on the other hand, speaks very, very fluently. They speak as normal as you and I, except the content of their speech is meaningless. It makes no sense whatsoever. They have normal speech inflections, they laugh, they sound like they're having a conversation with you, but all of their words are mixed and jumbled. They call it word salad. The idea that you're kind of like tossing a salad, you're mixing a bunch of words up randomly, and so the sentence comes out meaningless even though it sounds normal. So when we talk about comprehension of language, we have to start with the physical stimulus. Where does language start? Well, of course, it starts with sound, and sound is the change in air pressure over time. The frequency of air pressure creates the perception of different pitches of sound. So high frequencies, very high pitches or high tones, are created by moving air really, really quickly. And very low frequencies, like I have a low voice, those are associated with very slow-moving waveforms. And the size of the waveform, or the amplitude, determines how loud that is. So if I'm speaking loudly in a high voice, I'm going to have high-frequency waveforms with a really large amplitude. In speech, we diagram this over time using a sound spectrogram. So here's a sentence written in accurate time across the bottom. We were away a year ago. And on the y-axis, you have time. On the x-axis, you have all the frequencies from low to high in the speech. So what you will notice is there's this large band of energy here located at this low frequency. If you listen to my voice or your own voice, you'll notice there's a constant droning pitch that doesn't change very much. That pitch is constant and unchanging. But what does change a lot are the higher frequencies associated with the words. So when you read the sentence, we were away a year ago, there is energy in this second band that's moving up and down, back and forth, and there's higher order amplitude, or there's higher order frequency energy way up here as well that changes. And that's what the sound spectrogram gets us. It gives us the change in all the frequencies of speech over time. So if you were to look at like an MP3 file or some type of crude audio wave on your computer of speech, you'd get something like this, which is not very useful. If you're looking at a sound spectrogram, you can see the changes in these bands of energy here and here over time, and that's stuff you can't find in a regular waveform. You have to look at the sound spectrogram to get that information. What's interesting is you might think you know where the breaks are in the sentence. The sentence being read is, where are the silences between words? But you might have giant breaks that actually don't come at the breaks in the word. And this is a really important point. It illustrates the fact that speech is continuous. And you can get this idea when you listen to people speaking in another language. When people are speaking in another language, it sounds like a constant flow of chatter, and you don't know where one word begins and one word ends. But when you are, savvy and you can understand the speech, you create the breaks in your mind. The breaks don't actually exist in the sound. So, for example, here is an arbitrary break, but it doesn't come at the beginning of the word. It comes at the beginning of a syllable, and then other syllables don't seem to have very good breaks between them at all. We produce sound by in a multi-stage process. The first thing we do is we move air using our diaphragm, and that creates air in our windpipe, and that flows across the larynx and the vocal cords to create constructive turbulence. So just pushing air causes constructive turbulence, and that could be exampled when you make the sound shh. When the airflow goes over the vocal cords, you create tones. The vocal cords vibrate, and you get things that sound like vowel sounds, A, E, I, O, and U. And that's just a small modification of engaging the vocal cords, having them vibrate, and creating those pure tones. Then after that, the mouth can be used to control that airflow, whether or not you vocalize the vowels using vocal cords or not. And there's several types of ways to control the airflow. So for example, you have plosives. Plosives are consonants that are used to abruptly start or stop the air. So P is a perfect example of a plosive. P is the consonant P followed by the vowel E. P. Or boo, B followed by a vowel sound similar to O, boo. And you're immediately going from no air passing to a lot of air passing, and I think you get the idea here. There's other types of consonants and ways of controlling airflow, fricatives, and so on and so forth. And the combination of these produce the smallest elements of speech, which are known as phonemes. So when you think of the smallest sound you could possibly make, like a th or a pop, or anything you could do with your mouth, or a key, that small element of a word is a phoneme. The pr from pro, the com from comb, combination. Those tiny elements there make up phonemes and the building blocks of speech. So I'm going to stop right there and continue in the next video.